Here in the high peaks region of the Adirondack Mountains, we find Montaigne Conifers, dominated by red spruce and balsam fir, growing from 2,700 feet up to 5,000 feet on steep slopes. Alpine and subalpine landscapes are also found on Adirondack high peaks. 11 mountains, including those you see here, have approximately 70 acres of alpine tundra plant communities, normally found hundreds of miles north in Labrador and Quebec. Below this alpine tundra is found a narrow band of subalpine krummholz, a German word meaning twisted wood. Below the krummholz we find Montane Conifers, growing on thin soils and steep slopes. Montane conifers are found on the mountains of Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, and southern Quebec. Here we see conifers on Mount Washington and Mount Adams in the President Range of New Hampshire. Montane conifers grow just below the subalpine zone, which can be very harsh. On steep slopes with periods of drought, freezing temperatures, ice and snow, frozen soils, high winds, blowdowns, and extremes of soil moisture. Soils on steep slopes are typically thin, as any accumulation is washed away. Thin soils do not hold nutrients and moisture well, exposing montane conifers to drought and fire. These extremes may prevent most hardwoods from expanding their range upslope as climate changes. Harsh conditions are particularly evident for montane conifers on southwest-facing slopes and on exposed ridgelines due to prevailing winds. Conifers in these locations are usually smaller and take on shapes dictated by the prevailing wind, similar to their krummholz brethren higher up in the subalpine zone, as you see here. Species of hardwoods like paper birch and aspen are found sprinkled up the slopes occupied by montane conifers, often up to 4,000 feet elevation and even above. Maples, beech, and mountain ash could migrate upwards over time as temperatures rise, particularly where shallower slopes or terrain pockets allow decomposing leaves to create deeper, richer soils without washing away. The transition zone from the northern hardwood mixed forest to montane conifers is very interesting to study as it is highly variable. Altitude, steepness of slope, direction slope is facing, soil depth, soil moisture, and prior disturbance by logging, fire, or blowdown are variables affecting these zones. We fly here along the end of the Mackenzie Mountains and see evidence of die-off of hardwoods in this transition zone, perhaps from an ice storm or a particularly brutal winter, or simply old age. This slope faces southwest and receives the full force of winter winds and wind chill. Paper birch, aspen, and even a few maples continue well up into the Montane Conifer zone. Here, a steep rocky hillside with thin soils forces maples and beech to give way to conifers, paper birch, and aspen above the headwaters of the west branch of the Ausable River. Montaigne conifers begin to dominate above 3,000 feet here on the northwest slope of Algonquin and Wright Peaks, but notice how high paper birch and aspen grow on the shallower north slopes. Flying at the upper elevation of peak fall colors, we can clearly see the transition from brilliant red colors of a mostly maple, birch, and beech forest canopy to one of conifers, paper birch, and aspen as we round the corner and climb toward the ridge of the Sentinel Mountains. Ampersand Mountain displays another example of the transition from brilliant hardwoods below to Montane conifers above, with ribbons of maple, paper birch, and aspen extending far up into the conifers, growing where soils are deeper and richer. We fly a series of transition zones in the Adirondack High Peaks region to show that hardwoods do not just end and Montane conifers begin. Instead, we see a gradual increase in the number of conifers as we climb and hardwoods diminish over a couple of 100 feet of elevation. Where you see hardwoods in these transitions, they will be growing on some combination of shallower slopes, deeper soils, more soil moisture, protected from the wind, and warmer temperatures. We are climbing here in the airplane at about 1,500 feet a minute. You are seeing in minutes what it would take hours to see from the ground. We climb up through a notch with an equal mix of conifers and hardwoods. Notice how the proportion of hardwoods increases the moment we pass through the notch heading east, where the conditions are milder and the slopes shallower. On some of these slopes, fire may have burned the original spruce and fir forest, being replaced by a fast-growing birch forest, which may now be gradually returning to the original spruce and fir forest over a recovery period of more than 100 years. This ridge is facing south and reflects a harsh winter environment. In summary, Montane conifers grow on steeper slopes above the Northern Hardwoods mixed forest, and the lower limit is primarily defined by temperature. Hardwoods dominate at elevations below 2,700 to 3,000 feet. As you see here, microclimates and terrain pockets with better soils, moisture, and nutrients play a big role in deciding who grows where. Nature does not fall into neat classifications as much as we would like it to.